war. I'm generally opposed to war, but I think there are times when a certain level of amount of conflict is necessary if we're talking about something healthier coming from it.
1.5 to 2 million people died, and it caused a major power sink in the Middle East. And it's like Iran is a more powerful country than Iraq was back then. And I'm just thinking from the perspective of, could it snowball out of control like we've seen this so many times before?
The 53 coup, I mean, ultimately, yeah, it was wrong to get rid of Mossadegh. That was definitely British intelligence, trying to claim the oil. But by the time that the Shah was doing the same thing, there was another coup waiting, and that made things worse. This is about, yes, it's oil to a certain extent, oil wars, Venezuela being, too close to China, for example. And I don't know how this will play out now, post Maduro. I would love to see more, like I said, I'd love to see more capitalism.
Just this doubling down on not talking about Epstein. Who do you think he works for? What you're about to see is our interview with the one and only Sean Stone, activist, author, filmmaker, someone that's very interesting, and you might be shocked by some of the answers that he has to several of our questions. We talk about Epstein, the Iran war, Venezuelan coups, what Israel's role in all of this might be, and much, much more. But before we get into that, I urge people to check those links in the description. We have WaveWatch 2.2, which I want people to go and check out. If you use code WAM, W-A-M, you'll get over $100 off on your order. So pre-order today, 1,250 frequencies, no Wi-Fi required, no EMFs, no applications, no Bluetooth. It's for soothing your nerves, boosting your energy, enhancing cellular function, improving your sleep. It's endorsed by people like Dr. Motley and Dr. Brian Artis. I highly recommend people go and check that link in the description for WaveWatch. But now, without further ado, here is our interview with Sean Stone. Hey everybody, Josh Sigurdson of World Alternative Media here, and we are joined by the one and only Sean Stone, author, filmmaker, activist, someone that you probably all know and has done amazing work over the years. One of the things, Sean, that I really like about you is your consistency in speaking out and not following the trends of one, the left, or to the right. Something that I find fascinating about you is the amount of effort you've put into spreading word on things that could be quite controversial and bringing it in some ways to the mainstream. And I wanted to start off a little bit on the subject of Iran, which everyone's talking about right now, and the Israeli issue, where it seems like for years we have had people who support the Iraq war over the years pull back, say, hey, it was a bad idea. We don't support this anymore. And now it seems to be flipping back, where the same people that have opposed the wars for years are now saying, in this situation, it's okay. We should be able to go to Iran because look at the horrible things they're doing to protesters here, which, by the way, we have, of course, the Israeli government, the U.S. government, both boasting about how they are manipulating protests on the streets in Iran. What do you think is the purpose of the conquests we're seeing by Israel in the past years? Obviously, since the Nakba, really, but in the past year specifically, for the Middle East? What do you think it's drawing from, and the purpose of all of this?
Well, it's a little, sort of, okay. Here's how I look at the situation. The creation of Israel is problematic. Absolutely. I've always been critical of the way that it was created. But I've also been, vocal, and I've even said this to the Iranians and in Lebanon and places like this where, Israel exists. And so, you can't discount that reality anymore. You can't simply, push a Hamas line, that Israel should basically no longer exist, or that, we want to see the end of Israel or something to that effect. I just don't agree with that approach because I don't see how it's feasible in a practical sense, in a moral sense, and it would be tremendously destructive, right, to see Israel wiped out, which the extremists are playing with, right, that ideology. And frankly, the Netanyahus of the world, I think, are the biggest supporters of those ideologies, like the Hamasists and others. In fact, you go back to the 80s and you see that Israel helped to create Hamas. There's many articles on it, but essentially it was designed uh, as a counter to Arafat's secular PLO movement, right? So, the idea of a more radical Islamist group like Hamas played into the Israeli hands of saying, well, look at how insane the Muslims are. And so towards that end of creating Hamas, uh, I'm also a believer that Khomeini was backed by the U.S. and the British and the French, where he was domiciled in France, um, basically given sanctuary. And when the time was right, we've seen now from more documents. I mean, I know people have been saying this for decades, but more documents came out in the last 10 years or so showing that the U.S. actually was pushing the Shah not to use the military to essentially turn things over, and their expectation was that Khomeini would come in. Now, maybe some people didn't realize he would last that long, but overall, there was a way of manipulating, how do you say, manipulating Iran into the game of Clash of Civilizations,
Mhm.
which we know, like Huntington didn't just come up with that in the 90s. That went back to the 70s, the Arc of Crisis work of him and Brzezinski, Zbigniew Brzezinski, right? Looking at this idea of how do we create fault line crises in this region, especially like, remember, this has always been the great game going back over 100 years with, vis-a-vis Russia of influencing the various tribes, in the great game of Afghanistan and those stands, it was like, how do you manipulate the tribes, and, how do you basically influence um, the locals in that region? And obviously Central Asia expanded into the Middle East, because once we realized there was oil in the Middle East, that became even more important. And it's always, the Middle East has always been a gateway of trade. I mean, even to this day, Dubai is huge again, in terms of the old Silk Road paths and things like this. But like now, it's like Dubai is a hub of investment between East and West. And so again, if you talk about how this was thought of in the 70s, 80s timeframe of like, how do we create division in countries like Lebanon, right? Of turning generally, what used to be neighbors into enemies. That whole model that led to the Lebanese Civil War was then pushed in Yugoslavia to break up Yugoslavia
Mhm.
and the Balkanization, process. So the idea of backing Khomeini, who was a religious fanatic, but essentially a Shia fanatic, so that now you have a radicalized Shia division in the Middle East at a time when it really wasn't. There was no hub of radical Shiism. It was, Iran, which is a very secular, moderate country in this, in the 70s, as was Afghanistan, right? It's like now all of a sudden from that point you go through the 80s into, in the conflicts of the 80s, the Afghan war, the radicalization, sending these radical Sunni, fighters, mujahideen, fighters into Afghanistan from all over the world. All of a sudden, you create this radical Islam that's now terror. It's a terror to the world, right? They're
Sean, we
pumping.
do see like that problem reaction solution Hegelian dialectic thing playing out in the Middle East, as we do in Latin America with cartels armed and funded by the West as well. But I mean, you have Mujahideen, Al Qaeda, Taliban, Muslim Brotherhood, ISIS, Hamas, of course, as well to a great extent, getting arms from the very people that are using them as justification to commit wars and conquests within that region.
Exactly, exactly. So towards that end, when it comes to, for example, the current crisis, I mean, I don't always just look at it simply as, oh, well, war is bad. No, I think s- war. I'm generally opposed to war, but I think there are times when um, a certain level of amount of conflict is necessary if we're talking about something healthier coming from it. Uh, and with the Iran situation, I am someone that is a proponent of the overthrow of the regime. I've been that since, frankly, since I was there, because it's one thing to have a constitutional republic, which Iran is supposed to have, but then to have a supreme leader that's basically dictating on top of it, like a monarch. Personally, I don't support, and I don't think a lot of the youth support. And I saw that already coming. It's like it was just a matter of time before the economic situation, got to a place where people were fed up, and they're saying, well, why are we sending in, why are we sending money, for Hezbollah and Hamas and all these conflicts? Because these were the debates that I had with people in Iran. It was like Iran wants to be a regional power. They want to be a regional player, and they want to basically predicate their regional power on an anti-Israel stance. And I'm like, that doesn't, to me, that doesn't work. You can't base your existence on fighting on imaginary enemies.
Well,
It's
Sean,
like we can't
I
predicate our
totally agree
existence
with the
on
idea.
fighting.
Like the
Yeah.
vast majority of Iranians don't want the current regime in power. There's no doubt about that. But there's also, what we saw before with the 53 coup and the lead into the 79 revolution. We do have a lot of Western players manipulating the game a lot, like we do in Syria right now, or like we have in with the Arab Spring with Libya, etc. The Iranian
Hmm.
government, of course, they have acknowledged that there is a lot of influence from both Israel and the United States in the country. Just like this is something that actually is something we've seen a lot in the news lately. It's the same thing with Maduro in Venezuela, where it's like you don't have to like the regime without necessarily being against the other thing. So one doesn't lead to the other. Like I don't want to see the CIA or Mossad or whatever as intelligence agency taking over Venezuela, nor do I want to see that in Iran. But that doesn't mean that I like Maduro or that I like Khomeini. It feels like right now we're between like it must be this or that in the media. At least that's what I'm hearing in social media and in debate circles over this issue.
Oh, sure, sure. And I mean, look, I am of the mindset that a coup is it's time, and it doesn't matter if it is backed by the U.S. or not, because with all these, coups and historically, I mean, yeah, we can criticize and say, oh, CIA, and there are times when it's obviously led to worse situations. The 79 coup led to a worse situation than um than the 53 coup did, right? The 53 coup, I mean, ultimately, yeah, it was wrong to get rid of Mossadegh. That was definitely British intelligence, trying to claim the oil. But by the time that the Shah was doing the same thing, there was another coup waiting, and that made things worse for the people there. So, looking at the situation, it's like, here's the problem: is that people get into this whole dialectic of like, if the CIA or if Israel's backing it, it must be bad. No, it's not that simple because the people there genuinely need help. And there are times when you realize, okay, maybe yes, the our interests align in this case. And it's the same with Maduro. It's like I know too many Venezuelans, and I've seen too much of what has happened to that country since Chavez has taken over, to simply say, well, it's either the US imperialism or it's communism.
Mm-hmm.
No, at the end of the day, as much as we can criticize the US and our policies when it comes to certain wars and certain, the Vietnam War, for example, right? You take the Iraq War, and my main criticism of it was, it was based on lies. It was based on deception, and it cost a lot of, it was done, but it was done wrong. Why? Okay, you want to get rid of Saddam? There's nothing really wrong with that. There's nothing really wrong with wanting Iraq to be what it is now, which is essentially a republic. Corrupt as it is, it still at least has more democracy than it did under Saddam. There's nothing wrong with that. What was stupid about the way it was executed was to dissolve the Ba'ath Party and to basically create a situation where all these people were out of jobs, and that had previously been employed were now basically, turning to weapons and to civil war and to conflict, right? That was how it was wrongheaded. A situation like getting rid of Maduro, how can I say there's anything wrong with that? At the end of the day, all it does is shows the power of America if we want to go in there and basically get rid of somebody. But it also says, hey, Venezuela, play ball, allow more capitalism, allow for the freedom of markets. And I'm a proponent of that. I'm a proponent of freedom of markets. I'm a proponent of freedom of choice. So yeah, things are never going to be perfectly pretty as far as how they play out. But I'm not someone that's going to sit here and go, well, if America does it, it has to be bad. Like if
Right.
Russia running the world or China running the world is going to be better. No.
Yeah, well, I get you, and it's also I want to always throw out there when I'm talking about Venezuela, for example. I mean, I got personally banned from Venezuela back in 2015 for criticizing Maduro as a reporter, so I definitely have no feelings of support for someone like Nicolas Maduro. I think he's starved out people. He's done horrible things. Hyperinflation wasn't just the West. I mean, obviously, there was an attempt to manipulate the state of what was happening in Venezuela by the West. But at the end of the day, we saw what Maduro did himself, and that caused enough issues. But with that said, I still feel as though this is more than just oil or taking out a narco terrorist, because if that were the case, I mean, we wouldn't have just seen the pardon of Juan Orlando Hernandez, who was the leader in Chile, or Honduras, I should say, who, of course, was charged with trafficking 400 tons of cocaine into the United States. Or we've seen a lot of narco terrorists who've been pardoned. I live in Mexico. I see a lot of this, how it affects people on the ground. Every Venezuelan I know here hated Maduro. They fled the country because of him. But it feels like this isn't about even, I mean, oil is part of it. I feel like a lot of this has to do with the dollar hegemony system. I mean, the shift into BRICS, the move towards Russia and China. It seems like there is like these faint dying moves by an empire to try and keep control of the global economic trade and monetary system. I don't know. I'm throwing ideas out there. What do you think?
No, to a certain, I think what Trump has exerted, and it's been clear this year between Venezuela, between Greenland, is like it's like the North American hemisphere. Basically, we are going to be the dominant power in the North American hemisphere, and he understands that. Like he understands power politics, he understands money economics, in a certain sense of like, this is about deal making, right? I hope that this will lend itself to us making deals with Russia, because again, Russia is a great, is a regional power in across Eurasia. And the more that we can work to stabilize and have good relations with Russia, I think it will balance out China, because right now having Russia and China essentially allied is a very dangerous position for America and the West to be in. I think it's insane to think that, pushing those two great powers together is in any way a long-term, a long-term solution for us, because we're saying, oh, let's have the dictatorships over there. This is not Cold War 2.0, where, we're going to prove ourselves because of capitalism. No, China's adopted enough capitalism to survive. They obviously are doing, they are now a global power in terms of the deals that they're making, the resources they're accessing. Russia is obviously, a strong, it's a power in the sense of, the economy is a decent size. It's not huge, but it has a massive military. It has, nuclear weapons, and it has a huge amount of resources, which is, I think, why it's been so coveted by a lot of people that would love to access all those minerals, the rare earth minerals, the metals, you name it, right? The oil, everything that they've got, kind of like America, right? Very wealthy, resource rich country. So, again, as we like move forward here, this is about, yes, it's oil to a certain extent, oil wars, Venezuela being, too close to China, for example. And I don't know how this will play out now post Maduro. I would love to see more, like I said, I'd love to see more capitalism brought back, to the country. I'd love to see the resources given back, essentially not given back, but helping the country. I mean, it's unfortunate that you have countries like Iraq, even Angola, so many countries around the world that are just oil rich and mired in corruption and poverty, right? Venezuela seems to be that way as well. I'm not saying that America is going to change that, but I just feel like the overall ecosystem of what capitalism can bring can create more upward mobility, can create more wealth across the board.
I have no doubt about that. I mean, that is something that would raise people up a lot better in the face of, obviously, what happened to the Bolivar Fuerte, which is literally a Venezuelan general, Bolivar, who kicked the Spanish out of his country, and Fuerte is strong in Spanish. So it's pretty much the oxymoron of what the currency ended up being due to massive printing. But I from the conspiracy mind here, Sean, I can't help but consider most of these major world events were in some way created to cause a problem to come in as a solution later on. Like I can't help but think about the fact that when you mentioned China and Russia, for example, and that when we're talking about the BRICS system, I mean, the United States helped prop up China to a great extent in the 70s as a monopoly on trade. The Trilateral Commission propped them up as a guinea pig state for technocracy down the road. And now, just zooming out from the 70s to today, it seems like the U.S. government has basically given China the power that it has today. I mean, if you look before 1948, before Mao, it was a warring nation that was minimal compared to what we see today. And the United
Yeah.
States, Kissinger was a major part of shaking hands with Mao and creating these trade alliances and everything. Today, I see the United States saying, okay, well, China is this big behemoth. We have to fight it, which I don't disagree with, of course. But at the same time, who propped them up in the first place? It just, to me, it just always seems like a
But
circular
see,
kind of
that's why,
structure.
I always talk about globalists versus America. And I think this is where a lot of people get messed up. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of people get messed up on the US empire, the US empire. And it's like, okay, if America's an empire, I think we're the best option there is in the world. But I don't see us as an empire. I still see America as a republic. And I feel like there's the globalist agenda, which, I've written about. The New World Order book that I
Mm-hmm.
wrote was about this, this agenda to basically co-opt us into the former British Empire, essentially,
Mm-hmm.
and steer, steer the world based on, transnational interests and globalist interests, and not based on the Republican principle that the power derives from the people in America, right?
Right. You did your
Ultimately.
thesis in university
Yeah.
on this, right?
Well, exactly. I mean, so it was like just understanding that principle, like everything in America is supposed to derive from the power of an individual having sovereign rights that are given by God, not given by a government. No other
Mm-hmm.
government really predicates itself on that, right? Every government is always predicated on, well, the king gave you the right to have a
Yeah.
parliament. The king gave you the right to land.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, no, God gave you the rights, inalienable rights, right? And from that, we allow, basically we allow government to be formed and to exist. And there's this balance, and it's playing out right now, even in the conflicts of this, the present age. People are, don't understand the difference between states' rights and federal rights, right? But
Mm-hmm.
this is the balance. This is the conflict that we've hopefully will always be in, right? To remind ourselves the individual rights versus states' rights versus federal rights. And so when people talk about, like, yeah, how the trilaterals and the British and all these different, Rockefeller types and Rothschild types, I mean, you're talking about globalists who are absolutely playing a game with countries and using countries for their economic interests, whether it's to create conflict and sell weapons and sell, basically control resources, like everything from energy to food, water, right? You name it. Um, but then there's like the actual like national interest, and I can respect like every nation, every people having like certain interests you know, that sometimes will align with the globalists' agenda and sometimes will not. That's why I go back to like the Iran thing, where I'm like, overthrowing these mullahs, you can still have a constitutional republic, which Iran currently has. You just have to get rid of the mullahs, who are these theocrats, ruling over the people. And if the price is to accept Israel as a nation and have an Abraham Accord that involves Iran, I'm pretty sure that that's not going to change the power dynamics of the region. Israel exists. It's a nuclear power. No one's going to wipe them out. Maybe if they get overran by a billion Muslims, yeah, but that's probably not going to happen, because the Muslims are not that unified, nor do they, nor do they all care enough about the Palestinians to do that. So right now, it's just playing. Iran is just playing the heel, right? The heel in this game. To the Israel is the democratic state, and Iran is the tyrannical state. And there is some truth to that. So, but essentially in this game that they're playing, it's like Iran is just playing a role that is not helping the Iranian people, the Persian people. And that's personally my concern, is more for the Persian people than it is for the game of Israel versus Iran.
Well, I feel the same. I also, I mean, as far as the people go there, I do feel as though we've seen the problems that can arise from these coups as well. Like with Iraq, we mentioned Iraq before, and obviously the lies about the weapons of mass destruction and all that kind of stuff. I mean, like 1.5 to 2 million people died, and it caused a major power sink in the Middle East. And it's like Iran is a more powerful country than Iraq was back then. And I'm just thinking from the perspective of, could it snowball out of control like we've seen this so many times before? I mean, I lived in Egypt before. The amount of Libyans that fled into Egypt after Clinton's conquest, I guess you could say, we came, we saw, he died. After Gaddafi fell, I mean, it caused a huge mess for Libyans, and we saw the same thing in Iraq. I just wonder if we see this in Iran from one perspective. Yes, it would be great to get rid of the mullahs, and the mullahs are terrible people and all this, but like, first, do we really have the right to speak for their country? And two, will this not just end like a snowball event like we've seen every single time we've done this around the world?
Yeah, I mean, of course, conflict begets conflict. It's not like it would just be a simple, and that's why Trump hasn't acted. I mean, I'm also sitting here like trying to calculate like how do you do it?
Mm-hmm.
Because again, a lot of people that I know are like vehemently like go bomb them, and I'm like, yeah, but bomb them and then what?
Mm-hmm.
You don't win the war by some some tactical strikes, and you don't overthrow the regime by kidnapping Khomeini.
Yeah.
How many? Um, you don't win by that. Maybe like even like go out and kill 1,000 mullahs, but you've still got the national, you got the Revolutionary Guard, and you've got enough. You create like a more of a civil war scenario for Iran. That's the way I think this would play out.
Mm-hmm.
If it was gonna actually like if you were gonna like game it out. Um, my instinct is you might get a bit more of a civil war type of scenario. Although I don't know exactly how many. It's hard to know, like unless without like real intel, how many are actually like like diehard pro regime, because obviously there's a lot of young people that, and not just young, a lot of people that want to see change and reform and just more freedom. They say 30,000 people died in the protests,
Mm-hmm.
and you can't verify it, but that's pretty scary
Yeah.
if the regime is willing to basically kill tens of thousands of people. And where is the outrage? I mean, there was so much outrage in Gaza, over the tens of thousands of people and children and women, children killed. But like no outrage because why? Because it's Iran, and like we're all supposed to be on the same side. And that's why I have a problem with it. It's like
Yeah.
I thought the Gaza war was ugly, and the way that it was fought was extreme, and served Netanyahu's agenda. But Iran playing into Netanyahu's like saber rattling. It's like, no, I'd rather see an Iran that's just at peace with Israel and doing its and basically rising up as a regional power economically, not through violence, not through supporting jihad against Israel. It's just tired of it. Honestly, I'm just tired of
I think we could
everyone
also
using
all
Israel.
agree peace on earth would be the best situation,
Yeah.
obviously. We'll get right back to our show, but first I urge people to check that link in the description for heavensharvest.com. We are dealing with a crazy time, as of course is by design. In my opinion, we are shifting into a new order, and it's important that we get prepared for what comes next and aren't left behind with food rations, digital IDs, CBDCs, social credit scores, all that kind of stuff. Right now, we have an absolutely incredible sale over at heavensharvest.com. 25% off if you use code WAM, W-A-M. This is something that we've never been able to do before. This is for long-term storable food that's non-GMO, organic kits, heirloom seeds, water filtration and storage, books on how to get started. There's freeze-dried food. Again, this is an opportunity for you and your loved ones to be prepared for the inevitable. What comes next, my friends? So please take this seriously. Go and check this out. 25% off when you use code WAM, W-A-M. All right, now back to the video. With that, I want to switch gears a bit, and I want to let everyone know, by the way, because you have a film that came out last year, that RFK Legacy, which I want people to go and check out, and I urge people to check the link in the description, seanstone.info, and you can find a lot of his work there. There's one of the things that it kind of connects to what we're talking about, but in a strange roundabout kind of way. There's a major blackmail ring that it seems a lot of politicians are still really afraid of touching on both the left and the right. For years, I was called a conspiracy theorist back in 2009, talking about Jeffrey Epstein and Peter Nygaard and these kinds of people. And it was mostly people on the left that were calling me crazy over it. Now, for years, it was people on the right. Hey, we need to expose this and get this information out. I don't think it should be a political issue because we're talking about child trafficking. It shouldn't be about left or right here. Victimhood is victimhood here. But of course, with that, now it's the Democrats and it's a Democrat hoax. And, just this doubling down on not talking about Epstein. Who do you think he works for? Because it doesn't seem like just CIA to me. A lot of CIA whistleblowers have said it has every clean cut image of Mossad. It has obviously, with the fact that he gets massive amounts of money to blackmail people. The U.S. government doesn't even have a program specifically to extort other countries, though they do. Israel and a couple other countries around the world have the legal ability under their own laws to actually extort other countries like this. Epstein boasted about being a Mossad agent to exes. He had the ex-prime minister staying at his house, Ehud Barak. We have victims saying that, he was afraid of Ehud Barak, and Virginia Giuffre, who passed away last year, said that she was getting raped and tortured by him, and Epstein would do nothing. There's a massive child sex ring. It's not just Epstein here, but who do you think is running this, and why, and like what ends? Political ends to monetary? What do you think?
Um, yeah, I mean it's a system of power. It's a system of power that I mean, the evidence is that there's human trafficking networks, and it's much bigger than Epstein. Epstein, I mean, the ones I'm referring to are the things that, involve like the disappearance of kids, the actual murder, ritual murder of kids, that kind of stuff. I don't know if there's any evidence that Epstein ever like murdered or ritually killed kids. I mean, we don't really know what happened at the island, but that is something that hasn't really come up. It seems like Epstein, they, from my understanding, Nick Bryant is the guy that I usually, go to for this kind of stuff. And he said that when they raided his New York apartment, that they did find like video cameras and evidence that he was like recording. So it makes you wonder, if was he just recording conversations and meetings, or was he actually like, kind of like setting people up with underage girls
Well, I
and
mean, Sean,
recording.
they found that he had a camera in every single room in his place, including the bathrooms. And the tapes that were seized in Manhattan mysteriously disappeared soon after they were found. So that seems to point a big red flag at, this is a blackmail ring.
Well, I mean, again, it's not beyond someone like Epstein to have the paranoia and the means to just want to record everything. And, that takes place at his place. And, at the same time, yes, if depending on what kind of illegal activity goes on, then it's blackmail, right? Now, obviously, like we don't know that he was trafficking underage girls to people. I've heard anecdotally that he was trafficking women abroad, and they weren't well, at least the account I had wasn't underage, but they were models being trafficked to other countries and basically being put in positions of being raped. But they weren't underage. It was just a general, sex traffic that he was involved with. So again, you're talking about like powerful people that um have the ability to like get what they want, they think, and if it's underage boys or girls, it's that. If it's just, trafficking models and abusing them, or not just models, but like trafficking, young men or women that are not underage and just abusing them or taking advantage of them, or, whatever, even just paying for it. Technically, it's Mann Act. It's illegal, right? You can't traffic people across the state, prostitutes, right? You're not supposed to traffic people across the state for sex. So even that alone is criminal. So there's a lot of things that he's obviously involved with. That's why he's also very close to the head. He was really close to the head of the Victoria's Secret, right? He was so close to Wexner that he had a power of attorney. So that indicates a very tight relationship. And was that Victoria's Secret? Well, again, models that are oftentimes brought from foreign countries, and yeah, and then you're auditioning girls, and you have that. Oh, I work with Victoria's Secret. Let me audition you. Let me try you out. Let me send you here. You see, that's how these things work. And so yeah, Epstein very well connected, we know, to the business community, to the MIT community, to the, to the political community, and the intelligence community, because he claimed to be working with both, I think, CIA and Mossad at different
Hmm.
points,
Hmm.
um, which would make sense. Robert Maxwell, Jalen's father, was Mossad, if I'm correct,
Hmm.
and very connected to Israel. From a intelligence perspective, and even going back to like the formation of Israel, if I'm correct. So, um, yeah, I mean, Epstein is a what I mean, what is he? What is he not? He's obviously stretches across both parties, um, and at the same time, it's like one of those things where, you start to unravel the thread. Like the JFK conspiracy, like the RFK Senior conspiracy. It's
Hmm.
like you start to unravel that thread, and like it would unveil, I'm sure, a whole like plethora of
Yeah,
conspiracy.
yeah.
So that's
Oh yeah.
also why I
Oh,
think
I
I
mean,
don't, yeah. I don't know if it's because Donald Trump personally, has is indicted on the footage, or if it's more like you can't reveal this because it would unravel, expose the whole thing, how we
oh
operate.
yeah, I mean, just mentioning JFK there and RFK as well. But I mean, I remember one of the things that woke me up to JFK. I mean, everyone kind of knew there was something wrong there, but it was your father's film JFK, of course, which you were in, I believe. And it's just that the breadth of it, if you were to cover every example of that conspiracy, you'd have to put out like a Game of Thrones style series for years and years on end, because there's so much to it to unravel. And I feel like Epstein is definitely something similarly you can break down into. I have a couple books behind me by Whitney Webb on it, and it's like
Mhm.
that's two parts, and
Mhm.
it's still there's so much more to unravel. Do you think we'll ever actually see a list come out, or the video? Obviously we don't want the videos of the children coming out, but we want at least people in those videos, if they do exist, as has been claimed multiple times. We want those people to face justice, obviously. Do you think this is ever going to actually get exposed?
I mean, it's like asking me, when will people realize the reality of the world we live in?
That's true.
I don't know. I don't know if there will be like some point when the AI gets powerful enough that we can just ask it and be like, all right,
Yeah,
tell us,
yeah,
tell us what happened here.
yeah,
Tell
yeah.
us, what do you know about this?
Well,
What
Sean, I do want
come
to
together.
wrap things up with you here, and I really appreciate you joining us today. I wanted to ask, with your work throughout, the past couple decades in Hollywood. Obviously, for those that aren't aware, somehow, your father is Oliver Stone, who's one of the biggest directors in Hollywood history. And I want to ask, because of the controversial things that you speak of, do you see a blacklist in Hollywood for yourself, for your father, considering the things that you guys have come out and said over the last couple of decades? I mean, there has to be a strict policy somewhere where they say, hey, you talked about this. Producers aren't going to get involved in your movie anymore.
I don't know. I'm not worried. I mean, I just I, I can't worry about who's aligned with me or who's not spiritually, politically. I mean, there's no point. You just have to
Sure, but
watch
have
what's
you seen this though? I mean, surely, like being on the ground for so many years in a place like, for example, Hollywood, and your filmmaking and obviously documentaries, surely like there seems to be something there that seems to stand in the way of reaching the mainstream audience. Like you had documentaries that you had to put out with, I believe, Tucker Carlson, because
Yeah.
people wouldn't take them, and
Yeah.
these are really in depth films, but no one seems to want to take them.
I mean, yeah, but I think it just depends on the subject matter.
Mm,
That All the President's Men series you're referring to on Tucker is specifically about the Russiagate hoax, and the fact that well, it wasn't a hoax. It was a conspiracy by our own intelligence
right.
community to propagate this idea that, Trump was a Russian agent and his people. So yeah, at the time it was like who was gonna take that from the left? I mean, the
That's
left
true.
controls most of the media. and they were part of propagating that narrative. Um, so I wasn't surprised. But I think when it comes to other material, there's room to tell stories that maybe can be told from Hollywood, and maybe we'll just work on creating our own alternative spaces and studios like Angel, which did our last one, RFK Legacy is from Angel Studios. I think Angel's basically one of many that are coming that are just going to be alternative platforms and studios that will create in the spaces that Hollywood is refusing to create in.
Oh, absolutely. If you build it, they will come, as they say. It seems like there's a lot of shift away from Hollywood into new film studios and spreading out to Austin. And, even we saw a bunch of films made in central United States throughout Colorado and all these places that you wouldn't expect, 40, 50 years ago, which is really interesting. When you cause enough headaches for people and filmmakers and artists, then eventually people will move to another place and create their own thing. So absolutely, it's all incredible. I urge people to go and check out RFK Legacy if they haven't seen it already. It's a fascinating story, and of course the parallels are really interesting in that. Can you tell us as we close this off what you're working on now, what people can look forward to in the future, and of course where they can help support you?
Appreciate that. Yeah, no, they can go to seanstone.info if they want to check out my offerings, and it's books, it's documentaries, it's um consultation sessions. I mean, I've got a lot of things going there on the website. It links to my social media as well if people want to follow me. It's great to just be able to interact and you know get feedback, or maybe people sometimes pitch ideas, projects. So it's always interesting to hear from people.
Absolutely. That link is in the description, my friends. And Sean, it's always good to hear from you. We've been on a few shows over the years. I've never had the chance to have you on the show here. So I really appreciate you joining us and being so gracious with your time. And hope to talk with you again soon. Hope everything's well over there, and see you again sometime soon.
All right, appreciate it.
Make sure to check those links below, my friends. We are on Telegram, Band.video, BitChute, Odyssey, Rumble, and Brighteon at World Alternative Media. We're on Hive, Steemit, and Vigilante.tv at Josh Sigurdson, and on the Bad Guys TikTok and Instagram, World Alternative Media, Twitter and Getter at World Alt Media, and all the major podcast platforms except for Spotify, where, of course, we are banned. Hit that like button, share on social media, hit the notification bell, and hit subscribe if you have not yet already. Make sure to check out our solutions to the problems that we face around the world in the description of this video. And as always, my friends, live freely, live by example. This is Josh Sigurdson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.